In Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Kena Upanishad, he takes up step by step the logic of the text, which is not always obvious to us when we read it, because the Upanishad tries to formulate in steps of experience and not logic. It leads us from one experience to another because it is an expression of an intuitive consciousness, and it seeks to transmit to us its experience in the most direct way possible. But the intuitive experience carries in its wake all the associated ideas in the mind which the experience would bring with it. And Sri Aurobindo elaborates on all these ideas around the central experience, deals with them in the way necessary for the modern mind, which needs to understand as well as experience, and shows us the logical sequence of the text. So far, we are at the end of the chapter titled The Great Transition, where he discusses what the Upanishad means when it speaks of attaining to immortality, amritam. That these are states of consciousness which it refers to as worlds, and as we consciously seek to enter in the experience of that which is life of our life, mind of our mind, sense of our sense, speech of our speech, we enter into the consciousness which is the higher existence here in the body, in the life. And in this way, we pass out of this world, meaning this consciousness in which we are normally living, where we are primarily tied to our senses, our life impulses, and our thoughts, to a consciousness which is sense of our sense, life of our life, and mind of our mind, which is the origin and the cause of this life and this world, which is a tiny part of that greater consciousness, super consciousness. And so this being the theme of the chapter, he ends the chapter with two cryptic words. And it is worth dwelling on them because when Sri Aurobindo makes even a passing reference, there is always something important to learn from it. He says here, in the last section of what we had read last time, when the soul thus is liberated in this greater consciousness, it is not only free in itself, it is not only fulfilled in itself, it is no more bound now to be part of any compulsion in the lower consciousness. But if afterwards, if there is any assumption of the figure of mortality, it is an assumption and not a subjection. That is, the soul has the choice at that point to re-enter the limited experience of the senses and mind. But it is at that point as if something you take on like a mask consciously, not falsely identified with it. And so, like an adult who plays with a child in the playground, in the sand pit, he as if sets aside his greater freedom and identity, becomes like the child in the play. But at any point, he can step back and assert his full freedom. But for the purpose of the play, he may enter that. Why would he do that? Sri Aurobindo explains, a help brought to the world and not a help to be derived from it. So you play with the child on his terms. If he is constructing a sand castle, you also participate in the sand castle, And by example, you show him how it can be made more interesting, more complete, more strong. Help him develop his skills and capacities by offering something which is paralleling of the same level, maybe just a little more, or pointing to something little more which you are aware of and can do, but which you do not reveal at that moment. And thus you nudge from behind, from within, as well as pull from the front to help the child grow. So it is a way of helping. You are no more needing that experience for your own growth. Now, just this very casual statement has a very interesting implication. It means all of this life that we have now and all of the experiences we are passing through are necessary for us for our growth. They are our means to grow. If we didn't have them, we wouldn't be able to grow. And that's why as we are, when we are bound in this very limited mind sensory experience, thinking this is all we are, the experiences of life are the means by which we are forced to grow to our own higher and freer consciousness. But afterwards, you may re-enter this identification by free choice in order to help others. A descent of the ensouled superconscient existence, not from any personal necessity, but from the universal need in the cosmic labor for those yet unfreed and unfulfilled to be helped and strengthened by the force that has already described the path up to the goal in its experience. So when you enter in this way from a liberated consciousness, it is not for your personal need. You do it for your joy if you want, but not for a need. But the need is in the universal need of the cosmic labor for those yet unfreed and unfulfilled. Meaning now, we are looking at the whole universe as a struggling labor in the cosmos. Who is the laborer? Let's say for a moment we remove the human beings from the face of the earth. You look at all the struggle of evolution from mineral through bacterium, through single-celled plant, through animal life, and so on. We may say the whole evolution is driven as if by some kind of instinct. But who is driving it? When you say instinct, what is an instinct really? What is it in the plant that makes the plant want to grow? Makes the seed want to sprout? Makes the sprout want to reach out to the sun? It doesn't even know what it is doing. But the urge is felt within, and the urge pushes up. And the urge belongs to not the plant, not the seed, but the cosmic universal impulse for growth and for evolution, which is inside everything, inside every atom even. And so when you look at the whole universe in this way, you see one gigantic struggle, labor, from within the atom, from within every particle even, all the way to every form that it builds. In the Vedic symbolism, this will which is pushing everything upwards is Agni. It is the divine will embedded in matter, at first concealed in the darkness, and then slowly pushing, building forms. But it is a gigantic effort. Now, when you look at the domain of the earth's life, look back at the last 2, 3, 4 billion years that the earth is supposed to have been here. For 4 billion years of that struggle, again and again and again, in not one form, in billions of forms, the same thing repeated again and again. Every seed that has ever sprouted struggled against the weight of the earth, struggled to draw nourishment, struggled to grow, being crushed again and again by the steps of animals walking over it, and then again rebuilding itself. Look at the cells within the plant, as each of them has to continuously repair itself in a struggle. So when you look at this from the perspective of the effort that is put in, it is one gigantic, humongous effort in tiny, tiny, tiny centers everywhere. And then, of course, in the larger individualized centers, and now include the human beings. And you see how, for millions of years, we have fought and struggled to survive. Fought against the familiar, same old circumstances, in greater complexities perhaps, but the same problems, only to survive and make one tiny step forward. And so all of this you can see as a cosmic labor. And what is the labor trying to do? Push up higher and higher and higher those yet unfreed and unfulfilled to be pushed upwards until they are free and fulfilled. Now, if in this process one of us achieves that freedom and the fulfillment in the liberated consciousness, what would he do? Okay, now I am free. I can play around in the higher levels of the cosmos. I don't need to get back in identification with these limited experiences. Or it says, oh, let me share, let me participate, let me help. Let me even enjoy this from a status of freedom as the liberated play, while helping others in the cosmic labor, assisting the cosmic labor. Now, why would you choose that? If you look deeply enough, our soul, our individual soul, entered this by choice, in order not just to get out of it, but to fulfill itself and assist not in its separate self, but in its complete self. And that means the whole cosmos is part of its experience. And especially in the liberated consciousness, everything is within you. And so inevitably, you want to participate in assisting the cosmic evolution. How do you do that? To be helped and strengthened by the force that has already described the path up to the goal in its experience. So, you are able to help people because you have already within you a certain experience. You are able to give strength to people because you have already within you that strength. So what do you do when somebody is in grief, is in pain because of some personal discomfort or tragedy? You are there with them. If in you, you hold that strength and that clarity, you as if radiate that and give them the strength. If you can see farther than their clouded state now, that clarity of your vision helps them. You may not always consciously transmit, but the fact that you hold it is enough to be of immediate help to all those around. There are many, Sri Aurobindo observes, yogis who stay in the Himalayas away from humanity. It doesn't interest them to mix. But what they hold in themselves has its impact on the whole world. Even if they do not seek to consciously do something, the fact that they hold that power and experience in themselves is enough to impact the whole world. Sri Aurobindo observes in the Thoughts and Aphorisms that a yogi in the Himalayas dreamt of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Dreamt meaning, of course, in his experience, he dwelt on that. And the result was this entire revolution in France, which was the part of the earth which was most ready to receive these ideals. And so they caught it, and there was a huge revolution. From where is the source? One yogi sitting solitary in the Himalayas, dwelling on this triple aspect of the divine in humanity. This is the kind of small impact. In fact, the impact is much larger because it's unknown to us. The whole of human evolution is sustained by a few who hold and retain in their consciousness the strength necessary for humanity to survive and to move forward. So, to be helped and strengthened by the force that has already described the path up to the goal. Now, if you have already made that path, coming back to our earlier image, as an adult, you have been through all the play of building sand castles, of building various other kinds of structures. Now when you sit with this child who needs to build sand castles before he can move to building other more complex tasks, when you sit there, your presence is for him an inspiration and nourishment, even if not consciously. And you will see this in behavior in children. When sometimes they feel uncertain, they feel insecure, they reach out to the adult whom they love and trust, just to get their attention, and the attention is for them the nourishment. My mother, my father, my friend, whoever it is, respected person, turns to me with love and trusts. It's not even consciously felt. You receive that nourishment and you have the strength to do, and you begin and you persist. Because someone already has it. In the human evolution, you will find this is to be done not by one, but by everybody at whatever level they are at, to help others who are not yet at that level. But when humanity has to make a leap, which itself has not attained so far, no one in humanity has done, then who can help? The divine himself has to take birth in human form, pass through all the difficulties of the human nature and consciousness, break through that barrier of the human limit, and form in himself the ideal by example in consciousness, which now humanity must begin to rise to. And such a descent, such a manifestation we call avatar. The Sanskrit term avatarana literally means coming down to the earth. A consciousness which is already liberated and free and holding those states which are not yet part of humanity. Well, those states exist in the cosmos. But those states must be brought down into the earth, embodied in the human consciousness, that it can radiate on humanity as a help and a strength for the rest of us to now begin to awaken. And this is the reason why the avatar's work, Sri Aurobindo observes, is not done by publicity. It is not done by openly necessarily. Often the avatar is unknown, at least during his lifetime. And the impact perhaps greater because unknown. And even if he was not known, it did not matter, because the work is done at the level of the consciousness by that imprint. So you can see how in the sequence of the traditional line of avatars, each avatar represents a new level of consciousness, building on the previous one. To this day, we still revere Sri Rama. Not because he is simply somebody who defeated a demon king and freed his wife. That would be irrelevant. There are many people who have done that for their family members. But because in his life, he went through all the challenges that a human being would go through. But at each point of crisis, he embodied a higher value, a new consciousness which was not present in humanity. And although that consciousness and that higher value is available to us today, many have followed in his wake, it is still not in all of us the normal, instinctive, effortless attainment. We still have to make an effort to attain to that ideal which he set. But it's within reach if we make the effort. So the impact of his manifestation on earth in human form continues even today, is still relevant today. We do not remember with the same intensity and vividness the previous avatar of Parshurama. Because in his consciousness, it was the overcoming, the development and fulfillment of the Rajasic consciousness, the Rajasic mind, overcoming the inertia and becoming the dynamic, forceful, even violent action. That is already in us, sufficiently settled in human evolution that we do not need to turn to that for help. But the example of Sri Rama manifesting the sattvic mind, the ideal mind, it is still relevant because we have to make an effort. And turning to that example, we gain the nourishment. When children grow up, they hear these stories. It forms the mind, it forms the heart, it imprints those ideals within you as a living force. And even sometimes without realizing it, you tend spontaneously to put that into action. As adults, you understand much more. You reread the same story and now it makes so much sense. Oh my God, I'm going through exactly the same crisis that he went through. Of course, different circumstances, but the conflict is the same. And he did this, and you read about it and it inspires you. The level at which you are in your development may be different. The complexity of the problem may be different. But in consciousness terms, the leap required, the growth required is the same. And therefore, the validity and the special role that he continues to play as an ideal in humanity. Sri Krishna's example is much more difficult. Although we still relate to him for certain things. And a large part of it is what he brought upon earth in the earliest part of his physical manifestation. The bhakti that he awakened in humanity. Sri Aurobindo observes that before that, bhakti as a way of yoga was not in humanity formed. There was prayer, there was adoration, there was remembrance. But bhakti in which your heart pours out and gives itself, and in that self-giving joins with that which you love, as the way of sadhana. That began with his early manifestation in his childhood. And the whole period of that play among the gopis, in Vrindavan, that is the most easily accessible to us because it resonates with this call and with this need in our revolution. What he did afterwards, as a king, as a master strategist, as the friend, helper, guide, philosopher to Arjuna, in the midst of the battle, showing him the way forward in the crisis of life, that is still difficult. We read the Bhagavad Gita, and each one of us captures the little piece that is for us most accessible and relevant. But if you read Sri Aurobindo's essays on the Gita, where he gives you the full picture of what is being revealed there, it's a little too big. It's not even fully relevant for us because we have not yet matured to that point. And so we reread, and each time it is as if we gain a little more and a little more. So you see, the role of the avatar is not yet complete. In the sense that he has done his part, the impact is still continuing and is still helping humanity in its growth. Even if you did not know of them as an avatar, it wouldn't matter. Even if you did not know of them as examples, it would not matter. Because the consciousness would still resonate in you and evoke in you that urge, that need. And perhaps it would resonate in your immediate exemplar in your life through whom it would reflect. So the physical representation is a great help. But recognition of the avatar as an avatar is irrelevant because his work is done irrespective. Sri Aurobindo's work in humanity is still too difficult for people to recognize. Although the impact has been made, the direction of human evolution turned now upwards in a new dimension, and its results will continue for a very long time in the same way. So the idea here is, one who is thus free can help and strengthen by the force that has already described the path up to the goal in its experience. So every human being is doing this. One who is liberated coming back is doing it more effectively because he describes the full path of liberation. The avatar does it in a way that even these cannot. And then describe the path up to the goal in its experience and achieved under the same conditions, the work and the sacrifice. So in the same conditions that we are struggling in, he has achieved that same thing. So notice when you have a personal difficulty, let's say I'm struggling with a personal problem which is causing me a depression because I do not know how to deal with this, I'm as if in a crisis of my own identity, who do I turn to? I will turn to somebody who has been through that. You can turn to somebody who has read a textbook and can repeat what the textbook says. But very quickly you don't feel the resonance. He's saying all the right words which I know because I can read the book also, but I cannot feel the empathic connection where he has himself experienced and gone through that problem. And when somebody has done that and I interact with them, I can feel they know what it is. And when they tell you, yes, I know what it's like, here you will go through. I can feel the resonance of that strength. That's the help. Notice in life, those who have been through some of the worst crises, having come through them and being free of them, the most natural impulse in them is then to help others with the same crisis. So many war veterans who have been through post-traumatic stress disorder. If they have survived and come through and become free, they will turn naturally to those who, like them, are still struggling in the same way. There are so many who are victims of various kinds of abuse. If they have come through and been free, they will turn back precisely to help those who have been through similar abuse. The turn itself is so natural in the human consciousness because that's our best way to serve. What? Deep within ourselves, in the cosmic labor. On the surface, we may give ourselves any kind of justification, but you do not even need to justify. It's what you do. It's natural for you. So, from the universal need in the cosmic labor for those yet unfreed and unfulfilled to be helped and strengthened by the force that has already described the path up to the goal in its experience and achieved under the same conditions the work and the sacrifice. Now, if there are people who have achieved the same thing under different conditions, you will find yourself resonating with those who have achieved it under similar conditions as you. But you will not find the same degree of resonance with those who have achieved it under different conditions. And this is the reason why you will find naturally in humanity clusters form, natural affinities of groups, where you're drawn to somebody of a particular type because it resonates with your condition. And perhaps having crossed that, you may find the person is no more able to help you, and you move yourself and you find yourself drawn to someone else who has achieved now in your current condition an evolutionary need, and they have been through it. And that's why it is wrong to say that somebody is not good enough, not helpful. Each one is good and helpful in their own circumstance, in the thing they do, for those who need that at this point in their evolution. But the word we paused on, the two words, have achieved under the same conditions, the work and the sacrifice. These are the two mysterious words. Work with a capital W and sacrifice with a capital S, Sri Aurobindo writes here. Suddenly out of the blue, in all the texts that we have read so far, nowhere there was this work with capital W and sacrifice with capital S mentioned even. In the text of the Kena, as far as we have read it so far, in the translation at least, again there is no obvious reference to the work and the sacrifice. So why is Sri Aurobindo putting these two terms here suddenly at the end of the chapter as the last two words of the chapter, and then moves on to the next chapter as if it had nothing to do with the content of the text? And doesn't mention it again, at least not in the next chapter. Well, actually, he does set the foundation in the next chapter for a deeper understanding of the work and the sacrifice. But these two words are coming from the larger background of the Vedic concept of life and evolution. And so for an elaboration of that, we can turn either to various commentaries in his Vedic writings, or in this case, we will turn to a text from the Synthesis of Yoga, where he speaks of this. There is a chapter titled The Sacrifice. After that, there's another chapter titled The Ascent of the Sacrifice, -1, The Works of Knowledge, the Psychic Being. And after that, there's another chapter titled The Ascent of the Sacrifice, 2, The Works of Love, the Works of Life. Now we could read, of course, all 3 chapters to get a full sense of what is meant here by the sacrifice. But the simplest term would be for us to just see one particular paragraph. But I will take a few selections, the main paragraph which I want to come to. But at the end of that first of the chapters called The Sacrifice, he writes this: as that self-giving progresses, the work of the sacrifice becomes easier and more powerful, and the prevention of the opposing forces loses much of its strength, impulsion, and substance. 2 inner changes help most to convert what now seems difficult or impracticable into a thing possible and even sure. And these are the 2 things. There takes place a coming to the front of some secret inmost soul within, which was veiled by the restless activity of the mind. As we are, there is this covering of restless activity of the mind. Behind that, within, is the secret soul, inmost soul. As it begins to come forward, everything becomes easier. And then, it was veiled by the disturbance of the mind, by the turbulence of our vital impulses, and by the obscurity of the physical consciousness. The 3 powers which in their confused combination we now call ourself. So when I'm lost in this surface disturbance, I say I, but that's not real I. The real I is within, and as it emerges, everything becomes clearer. Then, there will come about, as a result, a less impeded growth of the divine presence at the center, with its liberating light and effective force, and an irradiation. You see, we use this word irradiation today. It's nuclear power. Irradiated foods. Well, there can be a destructive power because it is too powerful. But there is a constructive, healing power, which is because it is the source of all within us, all the harmony and beauty and joy and love and everything that we seek in life. And so its irradiation fills us with all that. So, there will come about, as a result, a less impeded growth of a divine presence at the center, with its liberating light and effective force, and an irradiation of it into all the consciousness and subconscious, all the conscious and subconscious ranges of our nature. These are the 2 signs, one marking our complete conversion and consecration to the great quest, the other, the final acceptance by the divine of our sacrifice. So again, here comes this idea of a quest, of a sacrifice. And the nature of this sacrifice, he explains in the Vedic image, is the whole movement of the lower offering itself to the higher, giving itself, and therefore the sense of the sacrifice, being therefore recast and reformed in terms of the higher. And the labor, the struggle is this effort that is being made within us. Again, to another portion in the same chapter earlier on, the true essence of the sacrifice is not self-immolation. It is self-giving. Its object, not self-effacement, but self-fulfillment. Its method, not self-mortification, but a greater life. Not self-mutilation, but a transformation of our natural human parts into divine members. Not self-torture, but a passage from a lesser satisfaction to a greater ananda. There is only one thing painful in the beginning to a raw or turbid part of the surface nature. So all the while there's no difficulty at all, nothing painful, he says. But there's one thing painful only in the beginning, and only to the part of us which is most raw. It is the indispensable discipline demanded, the denial necessary for the merging of the incomplete ego. But for that, there can be a speedy and enormous compensation in the discovery of a real, greater, or ultimate completeness in others, in all things, in the cosmic oneness, in the freedom of the transcendent self and spirit, in the rapture of the touch of the divine. So it's like this. In the beginning, there's a little bit of effort required, of discipline, and the struggle of the loss of, or the merging of the incomplete ego. The part in us that feels I'm not complete now is taken to its completeness. And so initially there's a bit of a struggle there. Other than that, he says, it is not self-immolation. You are giving yourself. You're not extinguishing yourself. You are fulfilling yourself, not effacing yourself. You grow into a greater life, not torturing of oneself. Now, why is this distinction necessary? Because in so many traditions still existing and still having great force in the human mind, we associate the spiritual journey and the awakening of consciousness with suffering, with pain, with torture, with self-denial, and all kinds of other painful experiences. None of those have to do with spirituality. The mother is repeatedly asked over years by certain disciples, aren't the ascetic practices useful? And mother says in one sentence, they are useful only for the exaggeration of your ego. But aren't they useful spiritually? No, they are only useful for exaggerating your ego. And she explains, when you take up ascetic practices of self-denial, torture, and other forms, you feel great, I have done something, I have denied myself so much, I have suffered so much, I am so great. But that suffering and denial have not helped in the growth of your consciousness. They have not helped this lesser part of you to find its completeness in the greater part of you. They have not helped you to grow closer to the divine, which is what you are seeking. And so what's the point? But because in certain traditions, these kinds of self-denial and self-torture have been celebrated so much, we've been taught, we've been programmed, that's the way to do it. And so obviously spirituality, oh yes, I don't want all that now. I want to enjoy life. Well, what he's saying here is the very method of the sacrifice is the self-fulfillment, is a deeper and greater enjoyment, and it leads to the transformation of our natural human parts into divine members. A passage from a lesser satisfaction to a greater ananda, a greater completeness of ourselves. I am at last fulfilled and complete in myself. And so this is a very important idea which we need to bring forward. And part of the problem is the English word sacrifice. You see the picture that comes to your mind, sacrifice. They sacrificed a goat, right? Cut off the head of a goat. That's not sacrifice. Well, symbolically, it has the same meaning. Cut off the head of the ego. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. But again, that is the ascetic way of looking at it. Then the integral way of looking at it is the ego joins its completeness, is freed from its limitation. The limits which it has placed on itself are now dropped. And suddenly you discover, oh, I'm one. I always was. I was only covered up in this narrowness. And Sri Aurobindo describes this beautifully in Savitri. When Ashwapati attains to this, he writes, the island ego joined its continent. There's no head cutting. There's no self-loss. There's no torture. There's only fulfillment of becoming complete, which you always wear secretly. And now the layers which separated have just dropped. And so we have to consciously cultivate this perspective of the yoga, of sacrifice, of the journey itself, and of the nature of the cosmic labor. All the other things which he's saying it is not, if we allow them to infect our mind and heart, they can cause great conflict and distress and create unnecessary, often sticky and lasting barriers by their falsehood. It's like allowing a falsehood to enter inside and accepting it while trying to seek a truth. The truth is that we grow from light to greater light, from darkness to light, and from light to greater light, and from joy to greater joy. All those things associated with self-mortification and self-effacement and self-immolation, etc., are distortions and falsehoods. So we set that aside now. So the nature of this sacrifice and the movement of the self-giving from the lower to the higher, then I will read one more paragraph in which these ideas finally join. This is in the beginning of the third of these chapters, the ascent of the sacrifice, part 2. And he writes it thus. It is therefore through the sacrifice of love, works, and knowledge, with the psychic being as the leader and priest of the sacrifice, that life itself can be transformed into its own true spiritual figure. And this is the Vedic conception, that life, our whole journey, is the sacrifice. Remember, we described right at the beginning the struggle that is going on from deep within each subatomic particle, atom, cell, plant, and creature, animal and human, everywhere in the universe without exception, within every atom, the struggle to push forward and rise out. This is the sacrifice. And the leader of the sacrifice, the priest of the sacrifice, is this soul within us, the psychic being, which is the one who chose to enter and push forward this journey. And so here we see the relationship of the divine will we described earlier as Agni, pushing inside each form and gradually developing a form of itself and a personality of itself that becomes the psychic being. And as that comes forward and takes charge of our life, everything, all activities become the sacrifice. How? You notice, and all of this is described in great detail here, we don't go too much in detail. You notice everything you do, every action, every thought, every feeling, everything you put out of yourself, where does it go? It's like a ripple in the water, spreading out into the cosmos, which is what? In its totality, it is the divine. Where does it come from? As a thought in your mind, as an impulse within your heart, as an action of your will. But where did it come from? Somewhere deep inside, and its source again goes back to the divine, within you or around you. Even if the thought impulse came from outside, it came from the universal aspect of the divine. If it came from within you, it came from the personal aspect of the divine. If it came from above you, as an inspiration to manifest something which has never been before, a new creation, it is still from the divine above you. So everything that happens in your life originates in the divine, in one of these three, and flows through you into the divine, into one of these three. And what are you doing? You're merely the device in between, the vehicle, the agent, the occasion, nimitta, or that is when you're unconscious, or conscious instrument serving that action increasingly more and more conscious of the source and the quality and purity of the inspiration. And in the process of aligning yourself with the divine will, you become now like a dynamo for its action to enormously accelerate within you and around you. The whole evolutionary process, rapidly. In other words, you become a conscious and willing instrument for the divine will to act through you. And in the process, you grow as well. So, everything that happens in the cosmos is part of the yajna. The word sacrifice in English, as I said, is a bit defective, but the Sanskrit word is yajna. Sri Aurobindo explains in one of his writings that yajna originally in the Veda means the divine himself in his movement of manifestation. Later it acquired the secondary meaning of the ritual of the sacrifice, because that is a symbol of this. The divine himself flows through each form into himself, flows into the form as form back into himself. And that's how the cosmos is made and formed. That is yajna. The Lord immanent as the originator and the terminus of everything in the cosmos. That is yajna. We are a part of yajna. And the physical exercise of that little sacrificial ritual is a symbol of this yajna. Symbolically there we remind ourselves that we offer our thoughts, our feelings, our actions into the fire, which is Agni, the divine will. It purifies, liberates, and takes it straight to the divine. Agni is the intermediary, because we do not know ourselves as Agni. But as we awaken and this inner, inmost divine presence comes forward, as the psychic being, it is the very embodiment and the personality of that divine will. Now taking charge and consciously participating in the sacrifice. And so, it is therefore through the sacrifice of love, works and knowledge, with the psychic being as the leader and priest of the sacrifice, that life itself can be transformed into its own spiritual figure. And that means everything in life without exception, which is already a part of the larger cosmic unconscious sacrifice, is now brought into the ambit of your conscious sacrifice. What do you do? Doesn't matter. Sri Aurobindo entered politics. He traveled all over the country, fighting, putting his life in danger, taking great personal risks, organizing the revolutionary movement, where necessary, training people to defend themselves with force, with violence as needed. And you would say, but this is all unspiritual, isn't it? Fighting and violence, weapons. But from the perspective of the larger consciousness, everything is a part of the divine movement. What makes it spiritual or not is the direction that it takes. If it helps the forward movement of evolution individually and collectively, that is spiritual. If it retrogrades the movement of evolution individually and collectively, that is unspiritual. All the rest in form is irrelevant, literally. Yes, the form can become more and more complete in the expression of its spirituality. So, when I go to my work, and in this case, if I am this teacher helping those children in their little playground in the sand pit, if I do it merely as a job, as a duty, then it is part of the mechanical sacrifice of nature, struggling. When I become conscious of my role as a focal point for the divine will, for the divine light, for the divine love to act and flow through me, then I become a conscious participant in the sacrifice, and the sacrifice becomes more and more complete and effective, with its results being more and more complete and effective. So, all life, it does not matter what, can be turned into this sacrifice as this psychic being emerges as leader and priest. If the sacrifice of knowledge, rightly done, is easily the largest and purest offering we can bring to the highest, the sacrifice of love is not less demanded of us for our spiritual perfection. It is even more intense and rich in its singleness and can be made not less vast and pure. And so there are different parts in us. Through the mind, through the heart, the sacrifice may take different aspects. And I'm reading this only because he describes the outcome of this. This pure wideness is brought into the intensity of the sacrifice of love when into all our activities there is poured the spirit and power of a divine infinite joy. And the whole atmosphere of our life is suffused with an engrossing adoration of the one who is the all and the highest. And so as this conscious sacrifice grows, this is the experience. Everything and all activities of the life are filled with this. The spirit and power of the divine infinite joy. And the whole atmosphere of our life is suffused with an engrossing adoration of the one who is all. For then does the sacrifice of love attain its utter perfection. When offered to the divine all, it becomes integral, catholic and boundless. And when uplifted to the Supreme, it ceases to be weak, superficial and transient movement men call love, and becomes a pure and grand and deep, uniting Ananda. So this is really for this sense of what you get of the sacrifice being fulfilled and what it leads you into in everything in life. And you come back now to the text which we were reading. When this mortal figure is assumed freely by the liberated consciousness, it is from the universal need in the cosmic labor for those yet unfreed and unfulfilled, to be helped and strengthened by the force that has already described the path up to the goal in its experience, and achieved under the same conditions the work and the sacrifice. And now suddenly the full sense of the work and the sacrifice and why it is capital that hits us. The work is not only on the scale of the cosmos, the sacrifice is not only on the scale of the cosmos, it is even more concentrated in those who are consciously struggling but unable to reach. And in those, to those, the help given by one who has already experienced it and can be there to support. That's the nature of this help. Under the same condition, they achieve the work and the sacrifice. So now you see why he leaves this as an indication. Because by introducing these two words, he has shifted the perspective of all that we had described so far to the entire scope of the cosmos, to humanity, to individuals in humanity, and the role of the liberated being in all of this evolution. Suddenly the full picture is brought there, and nothing is left out. If you now turn back to the entire chapter, where he has been discussing how this transition, the nature of this transition from the lower limited consciousness to the larger superconscious awareness, the shift of the worlds literally of consciousness, closing with this grand picture, the suggestion is that this awakening will take place, is intended to take place and will take place, not only in a few individuals, not only in all of humanity, but in the entire cosmos, in all creation. Maybe starting with a few centers where the full scope is first realized and then widening bit by bit into everything else. We discussed in some earlier portions how within our body, our tissue, although drawn from the same soil, which you see out there, the molecules being the same, the atoms being the same, the tissue is semi-conscious. The tree, which has taken the rock and become substance of plant, when it drops its leaves and the leaves break down and become now the new manure for the trees to take nutrition, they are not the same as the hard inconscient rock. If in your home you find the soil is not good enough and you want to kickstart the regeneration of life in your soil, you bring manure from elsewhere and put it like a seed. And as that manure kickstarts the plant's growth and the plant's leaves re-enter the soil and enrich it, the entire soil becomes of a different grade, more fertile, we say. What does that mean? It is more supportive of life. What does it mean? Life is more active and revealed in it, not concealed in the appearance of dead stone. In other words, life has emerged in matter to a degree that matter is fundamentally different. It is more conscious and more living, although in atom and molecule similar. And what is if you take this into complete progression, all of the material of the earth is going through this cycle of regeneration by life, and regeneration by mind, and regeneration by the spirit further entering it. The mother brought down the supramental consciousness while seated in the playground. Well, the soil of that space holds that imprint. When you go to the samadhi, you feel the presence intensely. Why? Because that imprint is established in material substance and there is a fundamental change in the matter. Even today, if you take a book which was printed before 1970 or early 70s, let's say. If you take the book here from the ashram, you hold it in your hand, you can feel a different vibration. Because in those days, often it was necessary, mother would ask for the books to be brought before her and she would put a special force in it. You can feel that vibration even now. The matter is different. When you use objects with love, with care, they actually grow in consciousness. Something of your mind and of your heart's affections are imprinted in it. That object becomes more conscious, more alive. And if this is going on for billions of years, the work, remember, and the whole earth's substance is being churned in and out. Something is being embedded deep into it. By the repeated descent of the spiritual force on the material soil of the earth, something changes. Until eventually, if you take it all the way through, whatever number of billion years it may take, even the substance of matter will begin to be more consciously expressive. Not so much in form perhaps, but in quality of consciousness. And in the form where it takes on the human or suprahuman body, it will even be able to openly express in form. The body itself will feel the divine presence and express the divine consciousness. And all of the universe eventually is destined to awaken to the divine presence. And as a whole, the universe is meant to be a form and embodiment of the divine Ananda on a cosmic scale. This is the journey of the whole universe, the nature of the labor, the nature of the work, the nature of the sacrifice, of which we represent tiny focal points who have just begun to discover the higher possibilities of this potential. So when you look at it in this sense, what will be the role of the liberated being entering, not only helping humanity and others, but eventually helping the whole cosmic awakening, the cosmic sacrifice, and everything in the universe will be part of that divine manifestation of Ananda. So this is the suggestion given. The worlds of the higher consciousness and the lower consciousness, which we have to realize here in us, will eventually be realized in the whole movement of the cosmos. So with this we complete the 11th chapter and move now to chapter 12 of Sri Aurobindo's commentary, where he takes up the question of how exactly is this transition of consciousness to be achieved from the lower mind, life and sense bound consciousness to the higher consciousness of the divine. while being here. And with that, he takes up the second chapter, second part of the Kena Upanishad and its 5 verses, which prepare us for this by first answering a critical question. The nature of that question and its answer we will take up next Sunday. For now, we can simply meditate on this larger cosmic vision of the work and the sacrifice, and perhaps dwell on our own life, aspire for it to grow more conscious as dynamo of the divine love and ananda to be manifested in its journey and sacrifice.